Hey everybody, this is Phil Kollar with Polygon, and I'm being joined for a very special video here by my colleague Danielle Riendeau
Hey, what's up?
and my good friend Tim Turi of Game Informer.
Hey guys.
Thanks so much for joining us, Tim. We're here to take a look back at the history of the Silent Hill franchise. Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff going on with Konami and with the newly announced Silent Hills project that Kojima was going to be working on, and then suddenly doesn't exist anymore. I would say the future of Silent Hill is kind of up in the air. So we thought it would be a good time to look back at why this series matters and why people care about it, and we're so interested in where it goes from here. To start things off, obviously, there's Silent Hill 1, or just Silent Hill, which came out for the PlayStation 1 in 1999. And what do you guys remember about this one?
Yeah, for me, this one just stands out as being such a complete mystery to me at the time. Like I had played, Resident Evil came out in 1996, so I had been playing. I've been playing that for 3 years, and thought that there was no way that you could possibly top that amount of action and like suspense and crazy monsters. And then you go to something like Silent Hill, and you're not even really sure what you're fighting. It's not defined. This isn't some biologically created monster, and we're fighting like weird spectral children in an elementary school, and I just had no idea what was going on.
To me, that's one of the interesting things about Silent Hill, the original, and then also the franchise as a whole, is, clearly it's building off this survival horror genre that was kind of really popularized by Resident Evil, but it's taking it in such an interesting direction. It's as you said, it's dealing with psychology rather than just pure horror. It's really psychological horror, in a way that Resident Evil never did.
I was a Nintendo 64 kid at the time, so I did not have a PlayStation, but I remember hearing about this coming out and seeing it in like a GameStop or whatever the store was at the time, basically, and being really, really intrigued by something that looked more like a horror movie than it looked like necessarily a game, because it had that film grain and it had that sort of really interesting intro that had that sort of like guitar song on it and everything. Yeah, it was the mandolin, and it just seemed too. It was such an amazing kind of like, wow, this looks or feels like it's trying to be a movie as opposed to just sort of a video game, which I always was super intrigued by. And later on when I actually played it, I was like, wow, yeah, that actually kind of makes good on that promise.
I think one of like the things about Silent Hill 1 that really stuck out to me at the time was the beginning is so unnerving, just like wandering through like the foggy streets. And there's one shot where you're going through an alleyway, and it pans and it shows like you from the perspective. The camera changes to from the inside of a garage looking out at you, and starts to feel really voyeuristic. And then you're just wandering through people's houses to get to their backyards, these weird twisting routes through Silent Hill, and it's creepy enough. But then, when the air raid siren goes off in the school, and you realize that this creepy stuff you've been playing for a couple hours, you're just scratching the surface. And you realize that you were not in control of anything.
Yeah, it's so effective at actually being a horror experience as opposed to sort of being, in control of things and really kind of able to shoot things. I mean, obviously you have weapons, but combat has never been the focus in Silent Hill. It feels like it's more like the focus is actually terrifying you with whatever new, weird, uncomfortable surprise comes up next.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that. There might be Silent Hills where combat has been the focus, and they might not be very good.
Yeah.
Let's move on to a couple years later. In 2001, we get Silent Hill 2, moved over to the PlayStation 2 now, and this one really, I think, this is where the franchise really came into its own, really blew up in the minds of a lot of people, and took that psychological element that the first Silent Hill had and just magnified it tenfold, where the entire story is really about the mind of this incredibly broken main character.
James, yes. James Sunderland. What a name for what a man.
Yeah, I really liked Silent Hill 2 because it started to feel more like, there's this classic thing about Silent Hill now, which is that the town sort of changes its identity based on what you bring to it, what kind of emotional baggage you bring to it. And so, of course, how twisted is it going to be when a man receives a letter from his dead wife, and you don't understand how she died, and things get revealed as you go through. But just the fact that town's iteration was sort of tailor-made to tell that man's backstory, his mysterious backstory, through just some really weird stuff with, Pyramid Head and strange mannequin monsters and like a doppelganger of his dead wife. It just felt a little bit more like it had a little bit more of an identity to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always enjoyed and appreciated that it sort of had a lot to say about, well, at least a little bit to say about sort of like gender dynamics and what this guy's actual problem was and how that manifested, with the nurses and with sort of all of these things that he was facing. And I always loved the mechanic about that sort of had to do with how often you looked at the picture of the wife and how much that meant to the actual game and the story that you experienced. I always thought that was such a clever and interesting thing to do, especially before this sort of stuff was mainstream and it was in so many games.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that, Tim, you mentioned briefly there, one thing that Silent Hill 2 is especially known for, the introduction of Pyramid Head, who ends up being certainly an iconic character in the Silent Hill franchise, if perhaps one that a lot of fans think has been used a little too freely. But what an incredible, just like terrifying figure. And every time you run into him in this game, it's just like it is the scariest thing in the world because like there's nothing you can do to stop this thing.
I do remember a puzzle where you had to dislodge something from a trash chute by putting some like a 6-pack of sodas in it. Do you remember that?
Oh my god, I do remember that puzzle, and I remember it specifically because this is something that we'll get to as well, but with Silent Hill 3. But I think one of the things that people forget about the early Silent Hill games, and if you go back now, is some of those puzzles are just they're really awful. Like they're
gnarly,
they're very bad, like adventure game puzzles.
Yeah.
It's not even just Resident Evil style, like find all these weird keys, but like adventure game logic that's like, why would I think to pour the soda down the trash chute? What?
Oh yeah, they were classic for that, especially the first couple, and well, and 3 as well. 3 had some gnarly ones as well, but yeah. So I actually sort of look back on that and feel like it was very charming, sort of at the time. Like, oh, good, you're taking from this other completely different tradition that has nothing to do with horror or horror games. It has everything to do with just being weird and uncomfortable and sort of shoehorning that into your really bizarre horror game. I always kind of found that, I don't know, a little charming and a little quirky.
Yeah.
So my feeling about 2003's Silent Hill 3, also on the PlayStation 2, I actually felt like that improved on Silent Hill 2 in a lot of ways. And I feel like it gets less recognition now, largely because I think the story was less unique and less shocking than Silent Hill 2's.
Yeah,
I think you're right about that. But I did like the protagonist quite a bit. Heather was her name, I believe. She was just sort of this sassy teen, and you almost never actually played as teen girls in the early 2000s in games. Like, I actually thought it was pretty cool. Like, oh, I can actually play as, like, a girl. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think, I agree. That Heather really stands out to me in the series as being an awesome protagonist. I think one of the things that some people didn't enjoy as much out of Silent Hill 3 is it seemed like it was, to me, telling the story of the town more so than, the story of, like, James. And there is some interesting stuff with the town, but it is so obtuse that it's hard for just someone to keep up sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think this goes back to what you were saying about Silent Hill 2 that was so special, which is it introduces this concept of the town changing to suit the psychology of whoever is there, right? Whoever's visiting. That kind of makes it so that learning the history of the town isn't something I'm terribly interested in. Like, I don't want to know how Silent Hill works. Not knowing how it works is part of what's creepy about it. So the more that they dig into, like, here's this cult that's running everything, and here's why everything's all messed up. Like, I don't want to know that stuff. Don't tell me.
Just tell me about Heather.
Yeah. And the way that they tie in Heather's story to, in the beginning anyway, with Harry Mason, who's the protagonist of the first game, it was clever because you don't even start in Silent Hill in the beginning of Silent Hill 3, which I thought was kind of a clever way to introduce players to the town from kind of a different angle.
I was just going to say, I love the setting in the early part of 3. I love the creepy mall and sort of theme park stuff, but I just thought that was really effective, and it felt so different from the first 2 games, which always kind of felt, they were kind of always dreary in the same sort of horror game way. And this was like, hey, we're going to do that more carnival, colorful, weird twist on it.
Well,
creepy bloody pink bunny thing.
Yes, the bunny. Oh my God.
Even by Silent Hill 3, that, you know, they'd already established these sort of tropes of like, this is every Silent Hill game is going to have the hospital, and every Silent Hill game is going to have, you know, a messed up apartment complex, and just all these settings that were very samey, or like a school. So the fact that they were mixing it up in 3, I think is worth appreciating.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the final Silent Hill game released initially on the PS2, at least, Silent Hill 4: The Room.
Yes.
This one was interesting because they really mixed things up with this one. You play as a character who is locked in a room. I believe the segments where you're in the room are actually in first person. Is that correct?
They are. Yeah.
So Danielle, you've played more of this one than I have. I've only played a teensy bit of the room.
Sure, I actually played it fairly recently, like at the end of last summer. I sort of did a little Scream stream with it with some friends, and I don't know, I really dug the atmosphere of this game, maybe more even than some of the other games in the series. It was just really cool how, okay, you're this character who's trapped in their apartment, and weird things are happening, and it's haunted, and things continually happen in the apartment as you go through the game. There's like a hole in the apartment where you kind of go into the town, and there are other settings, and so on and so forth. But I really liked how they structured this game. I thought it was very cool to kind of almost have an overworld in the apartment, and the idea of an overworld being a single room was just super cool. And they also had really good creature design in this one, that I personally liked some of the monsters in this better than some of the others, like the ghosts that kind of haunt you through the subway system and that sort of thing. I can hear that sound effect anytime I just think about it. It's just the most blood-curdling, ghostly scream. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, that was... I know exactly what you're talking about with that ghost. It was like kind of the classic kind of Ju-on or Ring kind of ghost girl, but as you were saying, like just being trapped in this one apartment, you know, like the rhythm of the game being you're trapped in the apartment, go look around, things look pretty normal to start with, and that's in first person, then breaking it up into third person and doing more of a traditional Silent Hill 1 through 3 sort of exploration, puzzle, combat sequence, and then returning to the apartment, suddenly something has changed. You can look through this wall, and suddenly this, you know, bunny thing is right up against the peephole, and it's right there.
The bunny is out there. Oh my God, yes, that got me so bad playing the game.
Knocks on the door, or it's really cool. I know that we'll get to it later, I presume, but it felt like, you know, some of the things that made PT so special and had me so excited for Silent Hills started to kind of had their seeds planted in the room.
Yeah, I think that's well stated. Like, I think the room didn't get a very good reaction when it came out, and I think a lot of that might have been, you know, it was trying new stuff. It wasn't necessarily the most polished entry because of that, but I think part of it too is it was a little bit ahead of its time to some degree. Like, those segments in the room are sort of more of what we think of as a lot of horror games now, where it was, you know, slower, quieter, and then sudden, like, shocking moments. But that wasn't what horror games were at that time. There's one other point about Silent Hill 4: The Room that's worth discussing, which, you know, this was when the series took a major turning point in the sense that Team Silent, the internal team at Konami who'd been working on all the Silent Hill games, was disbanded.
Ah, yes.
Which was obviously, for a lot of people, a warning sign that things were headed in potentially a bad direction.
Well, yeah, and, you know, it's not that... looking back, you know, the Silent Hill games, definitely after 2 specifically, they became more polarizing, and I think there was, like, a gradual degradation of quality for those first 4 after 2. But then... And so maybe people saw this as a shakeup that was, you know, a long time coming, but then now in hindsight, looking at what happened, it's like you would do anything for one of those early Team Silent style games again.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, so we had a nice long break before the next Silent Hill. Silent Hill 4 was in 2004, and then we did not get the next one until 2007. That was Silent Hill Origins, which was released for the PSP, and then I believe later on, a year or two later, for the PS2 as well.
The series started to take some really weird turns after Team Silent. disbanded, but
Yeah.
Origins felt like it clung really closely to some of, especially Silent Hill 1, since the PSP was maybe closer in the hardware power to Silent Hill 1. And it's the story of a trucker that I think happened to be driving through Silent Hill and had something to do with saving a baby from a burning house that ended up being linked to some of the occult things within Silent Hill. But it was really classic as far as the clunky combat, foggy, terrible draw distance. I don't remember a single scare from that game at all. Nothing stands out, but I do remember the combat system, which was kind of interesting, but frustrating in a different way, which was...
I know they introduced some sort of weird, like, quick time events.
Oh man, I don't even remember that.
Yeah, it was like, I think it was like when monsters would grab you, you would have to do a sort of like quick time, like tapping, like, which I think was new for that one.
Man, yeah, for 2007, that sounds about right. But I do remember that pretty much anything could be a weapon, and that you could pick up a golf club or even like a TV set and just smash it over a zombie's head. And there was a degradation to it, so that kind of frustratingly a weapon would eventually break, and you'd have to find something else. But
it's a little bit of Dead Rising influence then, possibly.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of that. It wasn't an incredible game, but it might be a cool one for people to go back to who were kind of hungry for one of those older style Silent Hill games.
Well, we do get a return to exploring the psychology of a character with 2008's Silent Hill Homecoming. This was released on PS3, 360, and PC. And in this game, you take on the role of Alex Shepard. He is a soldier returning home from the war, and basically gets home and discovers that he doesn't know where his family is, and also his town's full of creepy monsters.
Oops.
I actually really liked the premise of this one. I didn't play all of it. I played a bit, but I actually thought it was really cool that Silent Hill, which is a series known for exploring the psychology of characters, actually tackled something that felt kind of sober and very a major issue at the time, which is PTSD and soldiers returning from war, which I don't know how it ends, so I couldn't tell you if it really made good on that, but I was pleased that the premise seemed to be like, that's actually something horror should tackle. That's pretty cool.
I will say it's funny that you mentioned that, because this is definitely I won't say this is the worst Silent Hill game, but it's the worst Silent Hill game that I've put the most amount of time into.
Okay,
Which I played a lot of this game for some reason. I was just really into... I think the combat in this is maybe better than a lot of the other Silent Hills. It's funny that you mention how serious it is, because part of the reason I think that I was pulled through it over and over again is it gets very goofy by the end.
Is it really? Okay.
Very
Never mind
campy. But campy in a way that I appreciated, but I definitely don't think it necessarily delivers on the premise you're talking about.
Sure.
And you definitely, it has that thing where, when you beat the game, you can start over again and you get weird, crazy bonus weapons to use.
Oh yeah,
nice.
The games were always great about that. But Phil, I'm curious because I was going to tell Danielle, like, oh, you must have not missed much from not completing it, because I beat it and I don't remember anything about the end. I remember I remember cool stuff in the beginning where you're actually exploring like a childhood home and doing stuff in the attic. And I remember that was really creepy, sort of piecing together the history of this family. I think those were some of the best little snippets.
Yeah, I remember that too. That was really good.
So it's an awesome beginning of a Silent Hill game is basically what we're going for here, I guess.
Let's move on to one of the more interesting experiments in the Silent Hill franchise, which was 2009's Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
Oh, yes.
Which was initially on the Wii, eventually released as well on the PS2 and the PSP. But the Wii version was definitely... It was pushed really hard for having motion controls. But also for doing some really interesting stuff, again, going back to that psychological aspect.
Yeah, I liked this one. I liked that so it's a little cheesy. I mean, I guess it's kind of okay to be a little cheesy. Silent Hill it goes into cheese territory quite often. But there's sort of the whole premise is we're testing you. The game plays you as much as you're playing it, and asks you these sort of questions about yourself and your personality and tailors itself. thus. And I thought that was kind of cool. I know it was a little ham-fisted, but it kind of worked for me in this context.
I think that part you mentioned, Danielle, is one of my favorite parts of the game, or ended up being one of my favorite parts. Phil, I think you and I were working together at Game Informer when this game came out, and I was trying to play it with headphones, and the radio static would come through on the Wii remote controller. So,
I remember this very well.
Yeah, it would just annoy everybody. But basically, those little, kind of like The Room, there was these moments that would break up sort of the common action of the game, which were, like a first-person perspective as you're kind of being interviewed and spoken to by a psychologist. And you don't really know who the identity. You assume that's this is Harry Mason going to a psychologist, and because you play as Harry Mason during the sort of third-person action sequences, and there's a really satisfying payoff with that at the end that really stuck with me for that game, is that the twist sort of being one of the best parts of that game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And worth mentioning there as well, you mentioned that you play as Harry Mason. This is actually a retelling of Silent Hill 1. It's the same developer, Climax Studios, who worked on Silent Hill Origins. So they actually did Origins, which was a prequel to Silent Hill 1, and then did a remake essentially of Silent Hill 1.
Yeah.
So they were clearly very interested in Silent Hill 1 in particular. The thing where I think Shattered Memories loses some people is I think everybody's super interested in that psychological aspect and the cool stuff it's doing with that. But then the actual gameplay, I think a lot of people have trouble with. And I seem to remember, Tim, you criticizing that quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I really was on board with the concept that Shattered Memories was laying out. So, like we said, that this came out in 2009. So this was a year before Amnesia: The Dark Descent came out, which sort of Amnesia started this trend in horror where you're not expected to fight back by traditional means at all. You're kind of experiencing and enduring something. And Shattered Memories, I feel like, tried to do that ahead of its time, but unfortunately, it was kind of couched within the Nintendo Wii's motion controls, and so you're trying to deal with inaccurate motion controls as you're, fleeing from this monster that's chasing you, and you have to swipe to the side to like knock over a bookcase or something and slow it down. And I really liked what it was trying to do, but just it was a fault from the hardware itself. I don't think it was so much the game design. I should have tried it on the PS2 when they released it on that, but I did have some problems with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I also never tried out the PS2 version, so I would be curious if that fixes it, but I'm skeptical, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, and then we'll move on to, in 2012, we got Silent Hill Downpour, released for the PS3 and Xbox 360. Notoriously, one of the first games that I ever reviewed for Polygon.com.
That's right. Oh my god.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and not a game I liked particularly a lot. So this one again gets back to sort of the psychological stuff. A new character coming into the town of Silent Hill, and the town kind of reshaping itself based around that character. In this case, that character is Murphy Pendleton, who is a prison inmate. And he's, I believe, if I remember correctly, he's on a prison bus at the start of the game, and it kind of crashes on the outskirts of Silent Hill, and he kind of wanders into town and discovers nightmare monsters.
That's right.
Yes. Common thing in these games. Yeah.
Turns out.
I mean, the nightmare monsters are trying to protect their town. Get out of here. Come on. They're
seriously.
little xenophobic.
They live here. Come on.
This game, I felt like this one had some real potential. I remember I went on a trip to the Czech Republic to visit Vatra in Brno, which
Vatra
is like,
Games was the developer.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was really cool, especially since like they were trying to express about how they were trying to get some of the this kind of dour tone from Brno, which was one of the later countries to be freed from Soviet rule, and trying to kind of bring that to the game. And there was this obvious sort of connection there I was seeing. They had these access to all these amazing underground sort of there's this witch's gorge that had this folklore attached to it, and they went on. There's a huge sequence within Downpour where you're kind of in this underground cavern that's filling up with water, and that's an actual thing. I went and checked out, and it seemed like they're pulling from really rich material, and they had a lot of horror fans on board there. But it just, I think there was something about the meandering nature of that open world town structure, and the combat itself it didn't connect for me.
Yeah, it was close for me. Like there were moments when I was playing Downpour where I felt that Silent Hill magic, where I was like, this is what I want from a Silent Hill game. I want to be exploring this town. I want to be trying to run away from these monsters. But I think where it loses me is that there are a few too many moments where it really focuses on the combat. One of the other interesting things is they had a weather system in the game, going to the name Downpour, of course. So ending our journey through the history of Silent Hill on a pretty sad note, we have 2012's Silent Hill Book of Memories for the PlayStation Vita. This is by WayForward Technologies, and they decided to take the franchise in a completely different direction. It's a co-op dungeon crawler, sort of like a Diablo Light style game.
Some might say the wrong direction.
I would say
might say the worst direction.
I would say this is far and away the worst Silent Hill game. It's not good on so many levels that it's just hard to even like, and not even just I mean, obviously this is bad as a Silent Hill game, but also just as a game, there's nothing really that I found likable in Silent Hill Book of Memories.
Well, should we talk a little bit about the secret coolest thing that happened last year?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so the Silent Hill franchise has been kind of dormant since 2012. We've just been kind of waiting and seeing what, if anything, Konami's going to do with it. And then last year, it was a press event, I believe, at Gamescom, where Sony was having a press event, and they played a short teaser for something from a studio we'd never heard of, and then said, "Hey, this is called PT, and it's out on PlayStation Network now." I remember
it's free for everybody to just download.
Yeah,
go try it out. Hey.
And I remember I was working that day, watching the press conference, writing up news on it, and saw that and was like, "Hey, Griffin, we should download this and do a video. I don't know what it is, but let's give it a shot." Griffin and I ended up playing through it. There's this incredible first-person horror experience.
Yes.
Completely baffling and beautiful. It looked incredible.
And truly scary.
So terrifying.
Truly scary.
and also just like really confusing. Like we had a really hard time, but enjoyably hard, figuring out what we were doing and like how we were progressing. And we got our video up, and literally like just as we were publishing our story about, here's us stumbling through this game, we saw the news breaking that there was a secret waiting at the end of PT, which, Danielle, do you want to go into what that was?
Of course. Well, it turns out this whole scheme, this game, was actually a teaser trailer for Silent Hills. Basically, a sequel to the Silent Hill franchise with Kojima on board, the mastermind of these games, or of Konami and Metal Gear Solid, and Guillermo del Toro, famous filmmaker, and Norman Reedus, actor from The Walking Dead. So it was this incredibly elaborate little game that was actually a teaser for this massive megaton announcement for a bigger game.
And as someone I'm envious, Phil, that you were able to play through that game before you knew it was Silent Hills, or was a teaser for that, because I was traveling when that was happening, and I was so pumped on it anyway, and it was still no less scary. But as someone watching the creator of one of your favorite series ever, Metal Gear Solid, starting to work and teasing at very, very competent work for one of your other favorite series ever that had not been getting, had not been done justice recently. It was like a dream come true, especially, you start thinking about the Psycho Mantis stuff from Metal Gear Solid 1, or the Arsenal Gear stuff from the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, and all the fourth wall breaking crap that Kojima had done over the years. It just made so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really exciting. It ended up being one of my favorite games just on its own of last year. Like, I just thought it was such a complete and interesting and just truly terrifying piece of horror fiction that I even divorced from the Silent Hills announcement. I thought this was awesome. I played it a few times and played it with friends and screamed and actually hit myself in the face playing it because I was trying to protect my face during a jump scare and hit myself in the face with a controller. You gotta
protect your face when you're playing video games. That's important.
Yeah, seriously, right?
You should probably just wear a helmet just to be safe.
I think I should have. Yeah, seriously.
I mean, yeah, notoriously, Polygon gave PT our number 10 game of the year last year, which
right.
A lot of people, particularly I will say, a lot of people who didn't play PT were like, how can you give the number 10 game of the year? How can you give any of your game of the year slots to something that short, something that was a free demo, and something that was, in theory, just there to promote another game? But it was so good. It was such a unique and interesting and incredible experience that I completely stand behind that decision. I think it was well worth it. It totally earned that spot. And that just makes it more depressing, the news of the past few weeks, which is, we've seen over the last month or so a lot of news coming out about is Kojima still involved with Konami? Is he leaving after Metal Gear Solid 5? And sort of stoking the fires of that, Konami announced that Silent Hills, the project that was announced at the end of PT, is no longer coming out.
It's incredibly sad as a Silent Hill fan, and not even just a Silent Hill fan, as someone who just loves, like, PT is the scariest thing I've ever played, and I played it with friends. I've still never played it alone. And it's still the scariest thing I've ever experienced. And just to know that that's not going to exist in that form anymore is really, really frustrating.
Yeah, it's such a bummer. Such a huge bummer. And the fact that they actually, Sony took it down from the PlayStation Store as well. Like, you can't even download this game anymore. Now it's like a Flappy Bird situation, which is kind of feels like a little bit, of a kick as well. It's like, well, you might as well have this awesome thing that you made and at least kind of celebrate that. But it almost feels oddly appropriate given the quirky and depressing and sort of scary tone of the series, I suppose.
I take two sides of this. There's just one, I want it to still be available because I want everybody to be able to experience this. But two, there is something appealing to me with the idea that, like, the longer we get away from PT having been released, the less people will be able to play it, and the more that it will become like a weird urban legend.
It's true. Like, it's its own ghost story.
20 years from now, like, I'll be telling my son, like, no, I tell you, PT existed. I played it.
It was real.
And then you can tell him that your PS4 is haunted by the ghost of Silent Hills.
Yes.
And that it lives on in there, and that not every
literally
PS4
true.
Yeah, and we all have the ghost of that series living on our hardware, and it's a bizarre
I actually
thing.
have something sad to admit. I accidentally deleted PT a few months, like 2 months ago, and then did not realize that I had deleted it until, did not remember that I had deleted it, I guess I should say, until last week when I realized it was gone and I couldn't re-download it.
Oh no, that is also far too appropriate and fitting for this series.
So just to wrap things up, I would love to get your guys' thoughts on, obviously, Silent Hills being gone is sad. Konami says they are still working on entries in the Silent Hill property. What do you think the future of Silent Hill is, or do you think it has a future? Like, where does it go from here?
The future of Silent Hill is a weird one, in the same way that the future of Konami right now is really, really a strange thing to think about. I remember when Keiji Inafune left Capcom, and not to compare these two Japanese companies to being one-to-one, but I know that Capcom also said that they were interested in continuing making Mega Man games, and we have not seen like a single original Mega Man game. And I think that there's something even more. It seems like Kojima's departure from Konami is even more turbulent than Inafune's was, and the fact that Kojima was attached to two of the biggest series for that company, and knowing how, potentially, this is speculative, but there could be some very vindictive stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, and I would just hate to see this be put on ice, just because it seems like there's maybe some tumultuous stuff going on between Kojima and Konami. And then at the same time, on the other side of the coin, we live in a world where Koji Igarashi can announce, Bloodstained, his successor to Castlevania.
Yes.
And who's to say that Kojima couldn't cash in on the goodwill he built up with, first-person horror, and PT was so detached from what Silent Hill had been, there's no reason that he couldn't cash in on that and try to make something awesome.
I've said this to a number of people, but if Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro went on to Kickstarter and asked for money to create their horror game, they would break records.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
There's no doubt in my mind that they would break Kickstarter records. So like I would love to see something like that happen. Or, even not using Kickstarter, I can't imagine that there aren't publishers who would jump at that chance, that, like in EA or in Activision or a Ubisoft wouldn't be like, we don't have a great horror franchise. We have these two people who created this incredible horror experience that people are still buzzing about. Yeah, let's just bring them on.
Absolutely. And I feel like I want to have a little bit of hope, because I feel like we're almost in a tiny little mini renaissance for really good horror games.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Amnesia games, Alien Isolation, which I know is not everybody liked it, but I thought it was a phenomenal horror game.
It's a great game.
PT, thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
And PT, it feels like we're in a little tiny bit of a renaissance, and I'm really hoping that other teams and other creative people kind of see that and say, hey, we don't even necessarily need massive resources to make something really incredible and really special. I mean, great if they do, but it's not even necessary. I mean, just hoping that inspiration causes some kind of good future for the Silent Hill series, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. Konami's in such a weird spot right now. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if tomorrow they were just like, we're selling off all of our IP. But I guess I would rather have that happen and somebody who wants Silent Hill get it than to just have the franchise sitting there. Because that's what I'm kind of worried, is that interesting franchise that has such a great idea behind it, and there's so much room for incredible games to be built behind it, is just going to sit there and nothing's going to happen with it for years.
It'd be a real tragedy if the only thing that we got out of Silent Hill in the next few years was Silent Hill slot machine from Konami.
Entirely likely.
It's true.
And in its way, its own brand of horrifying.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. And thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Tim, for joining me.